In the late 1990s, a small rural town in Colorado had a house that nobody would walk past. Not wouldn't buy, not wouldn't visit, wouldn't walk past. Neighbors built an entirely separate road around their own town just to avoid passing the property on foot. A grown man who owned that house for years couldn't sell it for any price because everyone in a 50-mile radius already knew what it did to people who got close. Then one family bought it anyway. This is their story. My name's Elsa. It happened to my parents 4 years before I was born, in the house I grew up in, the house I still live in today. And I need you to understand, before we go any further, that everything you're about to hear was told to me directly by the 2 people who lived through it. Let's start with the house itself. The property sat just off a fairly major road on the edge of town, the kind of road cars actually used, not some forgotten dirt track out in the middle of nowhere. That's an important detail. This wasn't an isolated cabin buried deep in the mountains where strange things might feel more expected. This was a normal house, in a normal location, visible from a road people drove every single day. Before my parents bought it, the property belonged to a man named Mr. John. By the time my parents came into the picture, the house had already sat vacant for years, abandoned, decaying, the yard overgrown into waist-high weeds, paint peeling, windows dark. The kind of property that, in most towns, would have been snapped up fast given its location. This one wasn't. Mr. John tried to sell it for years, and every single time the sale fell through, not because of the price, not because of the condition of the house, but because of its reputation. Word had spread through the town that the property was haunted, and not in the vague campfire story sense. People who walked past it, didn't matter what time of day, morning, noon, evening, reported being disturbed. Not once, repeatedly, consistently. Enough times that it stopped being dismissed as one person's overactive imagination and started being treated as simple local fact. The disturbances varied. Some residents described seeing figures near the property that shouldn't have been there. Others talked about hearing voices with no clear source sounds that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. And more than a few people reported something stranger still. Objects being thrown at them as they passed. Stones, cans, small debris hurled from somewhere on the property, with no one visible anywhere near the house. Eventually, the town did something drastic. They built an alternate route, a bypass road, specifically so residents could avoid walking in front of Mr. John's house altogether. Think about that for a second. An entire community rerouted its daily foot traffic around a single piece of private property. By the time my parents heard about it, Mr. John had dropped the price about as low as it could go. He was, by every account, desperate to be rid of the place. My parents were looking for land. The property came with a large yard and, behind the house, a substantial fish pond. The kind serious enough to be a genuine selling point. Big house, big yard, big pond, small price. They didn't know the town's history with the place, or if they'd heard rumors, they didn't take them seriously enough to walk away. They should have. Before moving in permanently, my parents did some basic repair work, patched the parts of the house that had fallen into disrepair after years of neglect, cleaned it out, made it livable, but they didn't renovate it structurally. No walls torn down, no rooms reconfigured. They fixed what was broken and left the bones of the house exactly as they were. Then came the first night. My parents stayed over to begin settling in, and according to both of them, neither one slept not for one single hour, from the moment the sun went down until it came back up. The disturbances started almost as soon as the house went dark. Crying. A woman's voice, or possibly a child's my mother was never entirely certain, coming from somewhere in the house with no discernible source. It would rise, fade, and return, seemingly from a different direction each time. Then laughter, not the crying alternating with laughter at times, overlapping with it. Two completely different emotional tones, coming from the same unoccupied rooms, simultaneously. And then, throughout the night, the sound of objects being thrown, the distinct crash of something heavy hitting the floor, again and again. My parents checked every single time. There was never anything out of place. No object had actually moved, just the sound of destruction, with none of the evidence. By morning, they were exhausted, rattled, and, according to my mother, trying very hard to talk themselves into a rational explanation. Old house, settling wood, wind through gaps in the structure. Anything that would let them believe what they just experienced wasn't what it sounded like. They told themselves it was a one-time thing. New house, first night, nerves running high. It wasn't a one-time thing. The second night is where this story stops being explainable. Around 3 in the morning, my mother woke up needing to use the bathroom. This detail matters because in that era, in that part of rural Colorado, the bathroom wasn't inside the house. It was a separate structure out back, positioned right at the edge of that large fish pond I mentioned earlier, the one that had helped sell my parents on the property in the first place. To reach it, she had to step out the back door, cross a section of yard, and walk along a narrow path that ran around the pond's edge. She opened the back door, and as she stepped outside, a boy appeared at the pond. Not walked up from a distance, appeared. One moment, the path around the pond was empty. The next, there he was, walking along the edge of the water as though he'd simply always been there. My mother, understandably startled, asked him directly, "What are you doing out here? Where are you going this late at night?" She described him clearly enough that the image has stayed intact in the family for almost 30 years now. Dressed entirely in white, his hair cropped extremely short, nearly shaved, almost bald. And in his hand, he was carrying a black bucket. The boy answered her plainly, like this was an entirely normal exchange between two people who happened to be up at 3 in the morning. "I want to use the bathroom too, Mom." My mother, still operating on the assumption that she was talking to an actual child from the neighborhood, told him it was fine, go ahead. The boy walked into the outhouse. My mother, being polite, waited outside for him to finish before going in herself. And then she waited and waited. The sky started to lighten. Sunrise was approaching, and the boy still hadn't come out. My mother, now confused rather than frightened, the fear hadn't caught up with her yet, she told me finally worked up the nerve to open the door herself and check on him. There was no one inside. No one at all. And the bathroom floor, which should have shown some trace of use, some water, some dampness from someone standing in there for hours, was completely dry, not a single drop. No footprints, no evidence that anyone had been in that space at all, let alone for the several hours my mother had spent standing outside waiting. That's when the fear caught up with her. She went straight back inside and woke my father to walk her anywhere she needed to go for the rest of the night. The following evening, same day, hours later, it was my father's turn near that same bathroom. He was walking the same path around the pond when, without warning, something pulled at his leg. Hard enough, and at exactly the wrong angle, that he lost his balance and went down. There was nobody there. My mother would say this repeatedly. Over the years, whenever she retold this part, there was absolutely nobody near him. No person, no visible object, nothing that could account for the force involved. My father's leg broke in the fall. clean, verifiable injury from a fall on flat, empty ground caused by something that grabbed him and wasn't there. After that, the disturbances stopped being occasional. They accelerated as though whatever was in that house had been testing the family up to that point and had now decided to escalate. The property had a small storage shed near the house, a shed my uncle happened to be helping clean out around this time, doing the family a favor while they settled in. While he was inside organizing whatever needed sorting, fire erupted from within the shed. Not a slow smolder, not a candle tipped over a sudden burst, as though something had ignited instantaneously, with no source. My uncle would later swear, adamantly, that nobody had been using fire near that shed. No cigarettes, no matches, no burning of debris or trash. Nothing that could account for flame appearing out of thin air. He got out. The fire was contained before it spread, but by this point, the family had stopped looking for rational explanations. Something in that house or on that property clearly did not want them there, and it was becoming less subtle about it by the day. My father made a decision that, looking back, probably saved the family. He drove into the city and brought back a priest, a man named Father Jonah. Father Jonah's advice was direct. Pray consistently, attend church regularly, and let him personally perform a cleansing in the heart of the house, the central living area that connected the front room, the family space, and the kitchen. He began the cleansing, and almost the moment he did, the weather turned. This is the detail my mother always emphasizes when she tells this story, because it defies any simple explanation. It was not the rainy season. There had been no forecast, no clouds building over the mountains that day, nothing to suggest a storm was coming. And then, abruptly, a violent storm broke directly over the house. Heavy rain, roaring wind, thunder cracking overhead like something enormous had been let loose. The wind grew strong enough to tear sections of the roof clean off the structure while the family sat inside, listening to it happen above their heads. Father Jonah told the family plainly, "No one sleeps tonight. Everyone stays awake, and everyone reads scripture, straight through, until morning." No exceptions, not even for the youngest kids in the house, my cousins, who were fighting exhaustion the entire night, but were kept awake regardless, because Father Jonah was firm that this night, above all others, was not one to let your guard down. As the storm began to ease, something in the front room hurled a long wooden ruler across the space with enough force that it struck the floor like a gunshot. Everyone in the central room jumped. When they checked the front room, nothing. No person, nothing that could have thrown it. They kept reading. They kept praying. Around 2 a.m, with the storm largely spent, and the family still gathered together reading scripture by lamplight, they heard something outside. Dogs, not 1 or 2 strays, dozens of them, moving together as a single unit, running from the east side of the property toward the west. Nobody could get an accurate count. There were simply too many, moving too fast, to number them in the dark. My mother described the scene as looking like something herding livestock at full speed, except there was no herder, no person guiding them, directing them, or running alongside them at all. Just dozens of dogs, barking as they ran, sweeping past the house in a single coordinated wave and vanishing into the dark on the far side of the property. The family didn't go outside to investigate. They stayed exactly where they were, in the middle of the house, reading with Father Jonah until the sun finally came up. And after that night, nothing. No more crying in empty rooms, no more objects thrown by nobody, no more fires without a source, no boys appearing at the edge of the pond with dry bathrooms and empty rooms behind them. Once the house was fully renovated sometime later, properly rebuilt, not just patch the disturbances that had defined those first days simply never returned. I was born several years after all of this happened. Everything I've told you came from my mother, who repeated this story to me more than once over the years, always with the same details, always in the same order, never once changing the account in a way that made me doubt she was telling me anything other than exactly what she remembered living through. To this day, my family doesn't know who or what was attached to that house before we arrived. We don't know why Mr. John could never get rid of it. We don't know whether whatever caused those disturbances simply left once Father Jonah's cleansing took hold, or whether it's still out there somewhere on the property, quiet now, having decided for reasons of its own that we were no longer worth the trouble. I still live in that house today. It's been decades since anything unusual happened inside it. But every so often, late at night, when I have to walk out toward where that old pond used to sit, I find myself glancing toward the water anyway, just in case there's a boy standing at the edge of it, dressed in white, carrying a black bucket, waiting to ask if he can use the bathroom too. That's the story, exactly as it was passed down to me by the two people who lived through every night of it. If your family has a story like this, a house nobody wanted, a place with a history nobody could quite explain, I want to hear it. Leave it in the comments. And if you made it through this entire case file with me, thank you for staying until the very end.